ask if anyone is opposed. If anyone's opposed, and so is there anyone opposed to the motion and second for the approval of the agenda? Hearing none, we'll consider that approved. Okay, and thank you again, Tracy, for putting together the meeting minutes from our November 4th, 2021 meeting. Do we have a motion and a second for the minutes?
Steve, I'll move approval, but I believe that I was present at that meeting. I may have joined a little late. So just to amend the minutes to reflect that I was present.
Okay. Okay, I won't argue with that. Do I have a second?
This is a second, Miller from Ankeny.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second for the meeting minutes. Any further discussion? Okay, is anyone opposed? Hearing none, we'll consider that that item approved. Next on the agenda, I'm going to turn it over to Dylan Mullenix. He's going to talk about work transition the Iowa DOT regarding the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So Dylan.
Yes, thank you. We have with us today Sean Majors. Sean's with the Iowa DOT, and he's going to speak to us about what the DOT's process is, and just give a little overview of what the Infrastructure and Jobs Act is, but also discuss what the DOT's process is to help implement that bill and how the funds are going to flow to Iowa and then down to the MPOs and RPAs, local governments, and so forth.
Why is it not letting?
So if Sean is on, I see he's on. So Sean, I'll turn it over to you. Just let me know when you want the slides to advance.
All right, thanks, Dylan, and thanks for having me here this morning, everyone. Yeah, I just want to give kind of a high-level overview of the Jobs Act.
I think we got some background. If everyone could,
Google, right?
Oh, it looks like Adam McCann. If we could get you to mute. Sorry, we're getting a lot of feedback from your mic there. Thank you so much.
And Dylan, I can't see the slides right now, but is that? Can everyone see my slides?
Yeah, sorry, is everybody able to see slides, or is that not working?
I'm able to see them.
Cover page.
Okay. Yeah, Sean, they're showing here. There is that.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. We're good. Yeah, so you can go ahead and advance to the next one there, Dylan. I appreciate that. So yeah, we're going to hit a few topics, just the overview. We'll talk a little bit about the programs, a little bit about funding. We'll talk about the planning funds, the PL funds, some general changes, metropolitan planning changes, and then finally we'll get into next steps as we start working our way through the infrastructure bill and implementation. So Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is what it's called, IJA. We've also been hearing it being referred to as bill. I'm not sure which one is the best to use. We started off with IJA, so we're going to kind of stick with that for this presentation at least. It was passed by the Senate and the House and signed by the President November 15th. It includes reauthorization of all the surface transportation programs for federal fiscal year 22 through 26. That includes the $550 billion in new funding, with half of that going to transportation, which was good news. Finally, you probably heard we are operating under a continuing resolution through February 18th. The downside to that is we really can't access any of these funds, any of this new funding, until an appropriations bill is signed. So we're kind of in a holding pattern right now. Right now, we're working off of 2021 numbers, and we're only getting the contract authority and the obligation authority for the number of days to get us to February 18th. So we're kind of still sitting on waiting for some money to show up. Next slide, please. Overall, it's about $3.8 billion to Iowa over 5 years, $764 million annually for roads and bridges. That increase is about 30% for roads and bridges. $310 million has been made available for public transit in Iowa. Aviation total is approximately $25 billion nationwide, and that's from grants and formula funds. Waterways, that's 17 billion. All that money goes to the Army Corps of Engineers. And finally, rail, approximately 15 billion in rail programs, and then another 66 billion in the passenger rail programs for Amtrak. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of, here are the programs, and I'll just tick my way through these. Many of these you'll recognize from past authorizations. Starting off with the National Highway Performance Program. Those are the monies that are made available for expenditure on the National Highway System. The Surface Transportation Block Grant Program is probably the one you're most familiar with. Those are the funds that we distribute to the MPOs and the RPAs and the cities and counties through the bridge programs, the city and county bridge programs. That is also the STBG program is also where the TAP set aside comes from. Let's see, Highway Safety Improvement Program, that still continues on, and those are monies for safety projects. And last authorization, I should say, we set aside 2 million of that for rural county HSIP projects. The Railway Highway Crossing Program, Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, that's the program that we use to fund the ICAP, our ICAP grant program. That currently is about $4 million a year. And then in addition to that, we set aside another 3 million of that CMAQ is set aside for urban and rural bus replacement projects. Next is the National Highway Freight Program. That was a new program under the FAST Act. It continues on under IJA. And that program funds freight bottlenecks around the state. And then a portion of that funding was set aside for our LIFTS program, Linking Iowa's Freight Transportation System program. And so that's the local component of that, and that's a grant program also. Metropolitan Planning, which you're familiar with. State Planning and Research, that's the SPR program. We don't show an amount in there just because we haven't gotten tables yet, but that's a 2% takedown of the NHPP, SDBG, CMAQ, and the freight program. And so if things hold true as they were in the past, that would be about $11.5 million in 2022. So next we work down to some of the new programs. So we've got the bridge program. It's a nationwide bridge program. It's about $86 million a year to the state of Iowa. And it's just solely for bridge projects. It concentrates on bridge projects that are rated as poor. The next program is another new program. It's the Carbon Reduction Program. And that's a program which it's basically tries to mitigate what the transportation impacts to carbon are. So that's a new program that we really don't have a good handle on that yet. We have not seen much information, or at least in any detail on that. So that's one of the ones we'll have to really dig into when we start receiving some more information. The same thing with the Protect program. That is a new program that sets aside monies for resiliency projects. You may recall FAST Act resiliency was kind of something that they talked about a lot in the FAST Act, and that continues on with IJA in the emphasis to look at resiliency in our projects. Finally, and we kind of list this outside of the normal because we've got this national EV charging program. We don't really see that as anything that will probably go to cities, counties, DOT in particular, but it's set aside to help promote and fund additional national EV charging infrastructure around the state. So another program that we'll kind of have to keep a close eye on. I'm going to go back to one other thing on the SDBG program that I forgot to mention is you may recall that SDBG has a portion of the funds. 55% of the funds go to population areas or distributed by population areas, and the 45% is kind of flexible money, statewide money. They did add a new population pot this year, or this time. So before we had a population pot of 0 to 5,000, 5 to 200,000, and then of course the 200,000 and above money that goes to the TMAs. They added one more category this time around for areas from 5 to 50,000 population. So those urban areas, non-MPO urban areas. Next slide, please, Dylan.
Sean, real quick, we do have a
Oh,
question
yeah,
in the chat from Julia Castillo with her to ask whether the CMAQ bus replacement funding will increase with the total increase in CMAQ, or do you think that'll remain about the same?
Well, I guess that gets back to kind of our discussions that we'll have with our stakeholders when we start reviewing all of the programs. So I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end, but just kind of to foreshadow, these stakeholder meetings, we use those to get input on basically everything we do on the federal aid side. So, STPG target methodology, how to calculate targets, all the individual grant programs, including the ICAP and the bus replacement TAP. So those questions will be answered as we start work with our stakeholders and get input.
Nice. Amber has that on hers.
Okay, so to get kind of an idea of some context here, see how much more extra money this really means. You can see in 22, when you apply an obligation limitation to the funds, and that's a pretty conservative obligation limitation at 90%. It's about $107 million. I will mention though that leaves out this carbon reduction, protect, and EV funds. I'm not sure how much information we're going to get and how active those programs are going to be in this fiscal year, given the late start in providing the funds, providing guidance. There are new programs. I'm sure they'll have to go through rulemaking and all sorts of hoops. So we're leaving that out for right now because we just don't really have a good handle on it. But that's about the combination of those is about, I think, $52 million, somewhere in that range. So just some context as far, and it does show some moderate growth throughout the life of the act. Next slide, please. PL. So obviously the TMAs get all the MPOs, I should say, get the PL funds every year. This just kind of shows what the nationwide total is, and the state of Iowa total is the $2.6 million in 2022. And in that case, Des Moines MPO, I think the target for that, based on the $2.6 million, is about $928,000. So that's looks like it's about a 23% increase over last time, and maybe a little, well, yeah, I'll say a 23% increase. Next slide, please. So here's the FTA side of the planning funds, and they're the top portion, the 5305D money. Those are the monies that go to the MPO. The monies below are the monies that are part of the RPA allocation. Next one, please. So some recommended actions, I guess, is, I think as with all the programs, is there's some increased funding. So we're asking that with those increases that the MPOs and the RPAs start kind of looking over what their planning needs are, and start working towards that end with the extra monies, and identify projects and unmet needs, and prioritize that within their MPOs or RPAs. And so that's kind of the next step. But just overall, more money means more ability to do some more things. So start looking ahead at that, I guess. Next slide. We'll start getting into some of the other modes. And I will confess, I am not an expert on transit, rail, or waterways, but I'll do my best to try to give you an overall look at it. But as far as transit is concerned, like I mentioned earlier, it's approximately $310 million over 5 years. That's about a $15 million increase in 2022. And you can see that what those apportionments are there for the life of the act, like I said, with some moderate increases with growth throughout the act. Next slide, please. The transit programs pretty much remained what we're used to. The bus and bus facilities formula program, it includes increases in funds. The bus and bus facilities competitive program, that continues, plus some increases. And the lower no emission grants are also still included, and those have increased funding associated with those also. Next slide, please. Aviation, $15 billion for airport infrastructure grants. That's a formula distribution with local match, and that is a new program. We also have a $5 billion for a new airport terminal grant, and that's a competitive grant. That's also new. And then $5 billion for FAA facilities and equipment. And my understanding is the Des Moines Airport is set to receive about $5.5 million of that 15. I think it's of the $15 billion. No, I shouldn't say that. I think it's of the $5 billion. Waterways, probably not a huge concern for your folks, but there's some money available, obviously, for waterway projects on the rivers. Like I said, all this funding goes to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Rail programs. The first one is a new program, Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. It's a new competitive program. It's similar to the rail highway crossing monies that we get now. Rail crossing eliminations were eligible for those funds, but we have a new competitive program for that. The Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Program, known as CRISI, that continues, plus some existing, plus some extra money. Federal state partnership for intercity passenger rail, and that's the State of Good Repair program. And then finally, we've got $66 billion for passenger rail, and that's primarily to fund the Amtrak maintenance backlog. Next slide, please. This is just the summary of what those amounts are for those individual programs, with $5 million for the first one, about $2.5 million for the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program, $250,000 or million for the Restoration Enhancement Grants, and then finally $7.5 million for the intercity passenger rail. So freight and multimodal programs, there's a new program. It's National Infrastructure Project Assistance Program, and that's a new competitive for states, MPOs. It's for mega projects and includes some intermodal projects. Next is infra, which you've probably all heard of. That's for highway and freight projects of national or regional significance. Next is the RAISE program, that also has increased funding. RAISE is been known as BUILD in the past. It's been known as Tiger in the past. I think Des Moines and the Des Moines area has had a couple projects that have gotten monies from those programs before. I think Broadway Avenue, Des Moines Transload Facility are examples of projects that have received funds from those. Finally, we have SMART grants, and I guess I call that a newish program. It's a competitive for states, MPOs, transit agencies, etc. It basically funds it looks to improve safety through technological improvements, and that's where that one is. And I will mention and you're fine to move on to the next slide, Dylan, but what I would mention is there are a lot of new programs associated with this reauthorization. we are still getting to the bottom of a lot of them. Some of them seem a little obscure and they're kind of hard to find in a 1,400 page bill, but or 1,800 page, but we're working our way through those. One we kind of came across the other day was there's a study for the I-35 corridor that we came across. So we're still kind of working our way through a lot of it. So as I mentioned, the other new programs of carbon reduction, we talked a little bit about that. That money's available for a wide variety of projects, transit included, and also probably some bike ped type of improvements. Basically anything that takes cars off the road or reduces the carbon footprint. The Protect program, also, like I mentioned, resiliency projects. There's a core program, formula program that each state will get, and then there's also some competitive grant funds also available for that. The charging and fueling infrastructure program, they have application based, but then they also have formula monies that will come to the states. Last is that highway, that bridge program that I mentioned. There's the 86 million is the federal fund, or is the formula funds that we will be getting. And then there's also a competitive program for large bridges. Let's next slide, please. So how will the funds flow to Iowa? Basically all the highway and bridge funds flow through the DOT first. We work with the Transportation Commission and our stakeholders to determine what we will allocate to cities, counties, RPAs, and MPOs. One thing I will mention is that while getting additional funds is great, it does put some pressure on us as far as matching those federal funds. And so that's where the SWAP program is going to have to be reviewed to see what sort of capacity we can have to continue to swap that many primary road fund dollars in exchange for those federal dollars. Like I said, with those increases, it just puts us in a tenuous situation as far as how much money we have available to match all those funds. So that will be another big part of what we talk about in those stakeholder meetings is how do we address SWAP? How much can we continue to swap? What types of programs will continue to swap? What types of projects maybe we continue to swap? Transit. Larger metro areas, Des Moines, they get a directly from FTA. All the other transit funds flow through the DOT to the transit agencies. Aviation is directly from FAA to eligible airports. Rail is competitive grants, and Iowa DOT assists and coordinates the use of those funds. And then once again, waterways, that goes directly to the core. When will the funds flow to Iowa? Advanced appropriations for some new programs and competitive grants, those are supposedly right away. I have not seen a call for projects for grant or submittals or anything like that, applications. The next is basically waiting for an appropriations bill so they can start freeing up this money so we can start getting it. And then, like I said, DOT is preparing for discretionary grant applications. Like I said, a lot of new money in the grant form. So we'll have to be looking at every program to see what's available for good projects. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail about the planning related sections. There's really not a lot of new information or changes, or at least I should say significant changes. A couple I will highlight: clarifies considerations required of the MPOs when initially designating officials or representatives shall consider the equitable proportional representation of the population in the metropolitan areas. And then finally, it encourages states and MPOs to use social media and other web-based tools to encourage public participation and solicit feedback. The other two bullets are basically housing related, and they're you may see in there that it says may, and when I see May, I say that's not required. So just encouraged probably. Next, please, Dylan. Fiscal constraint on the long range plan. Requires the US DOT within 1 year to update the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, to ensure that the out-year Metropolitan Transportation Plan are defined as beyond the first 4 years. This matches what the 4-year Transportation Improvement Program horizon or plan horizon. And it sounds like it would ease the fiscal constraint after the 4-year horizon, but would not eliminate the requirement altogether. Let's see. Increasing safe and accessible transportation options. I'm not an expert on this. I don't think it's a major change to anything that's going on right now. And I guess I'll defer to if you get any specific questions on that to kick it back to me or Andy Lunan, and we'll probably reach out to somebody like Zach in our systems planning office to maybe get more detail on that if somebody's interested. Next slide. These are just the FTA programs related to IJA on the planning side, and we kind of touched on those earlier in the presentation. So next steps. You know, the infrastructure bill is passed. That was the first big hurdle. Currently, we're all kind of reviewing all of the information in the bill and kind of assessing what's going on there. We've been starting to go to our Transportation Commission to kind of keep them up to date on the programs and the process. We took initial overview to them in October. The next big thing is the stakeholder input, and that really drives a lot of the decision making or the recommendations to the commission on how we're going to go ahead and implement the new reauthorization. So we have our first stakeholder meeting has been set up, and it's on February 2nd. You'll be happy to know Todd Ashby has agreed to be a representative for the MPOs and RPAs on that committee. So he'll have firsthand knowledge of what's going on. We definitely, even though Todd's on the committee, there's definitely will be outreach to cities and counties through our Office of Local Systems, to the MPOs and the RPAs through our Office of Systems Planning, and we'll kind of keep everyone apprised of what's going on, and request input on what the proposals are and finally recommendations when we get to that point. But after we have a couple of these, probably 2 of these stakeholder meetings, then we'll summarize that and provide input to the commission, and then finally recommendations, and then finally commission action, final action, and that'll set in place how we'll implement the IJA and how we'll kind of how we go through the next 5 years of on the federal side. That's my last slide. I went through a lot there, so I guess I would open it up to, does anybody have any questions?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean Majors. That's a lot of information to put together. I appreciate you and your team assembling. There's a lot going on, to say the least, with this large bill and the American Rescue Plan Act. It's a lot to handle. So thank you. And is there any questions for Sean?
And I might add, I'll if you have any questions afterwards, or a day later, 2 days later, you start thinking about something, just reach out to us. We'll try our best to answer the questions as best we can with the information we have. So yeah, don't feel, or I should say, feel free to reach out to myself or Andy Lunan or any of our modal folks if somebody has questions related to transit or whatever, rail. So.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. All right. Next, we have item 5, report on the fiscal year 2023 Unified Planning Work Program and Budget Development. I'm going to turn it over to Dylan Mullinex.
All right, thank you. So kind of building off of what Sean was just talking about, we're putting together our work program and budget for the next fiscal year, which will start July 1st. And knowing that, as Sean just talked about, there is some additional funding that we're anticipating. This is a little different than what we've done in the past, just because we do have some additional resources coming in. Just while I'm thinking about it, Sean had mentioned there was about 23% increase in PL funds, and that's what we're seeing from our initial estimates from the DOT. It's about a little over $200,000 increase for the funds that we're receiving. So as Sean said, we're taking a look at what we have going on in a lot of different areas to figure out how do we, we're not in a situation as some people where they might not be able to spend all that. We have the need for it, definitely. But trying to figure out how we put that into our program. So just to recap this information, this is kind of something we go over each year. But just so those that might not be aware, some new folks, the work program goes over our scope of work for the next fiscal year. So it outlines all the activities that we're going to do, all the projects and so forth, as well as the costs for those projects. Most all of our activities are tied to the federal planning requirements. And again, with the bill, some of those requirements did change slightly. Sean mentioned that we may engage with housing coordination and things like that. So there's a couple things like that we'll have to take a look at and make sure that we're meeting the federal requirements. The draft is due April 1st. So we'll come back here in March, have you approve a draft, and then we'll come back again in May, have you approve a final version of that after the DOT has a chance to comment. Just some of the requirements that are put down to us by US code. There's a couple key things that we have to do, such as the work program itself. We have to develop and maintain a long-range transportation plan. We're not in the year that a plan update is due, so we'll just keep maintaining that and amending it as we need to. The annual tip is something we have to do, and then maintaining our public participation plan. There's some additional requirements because we are a TMA, that's an MPO over 200,000 in population. We have to have a congestion management process. There's certain requirements for our decision-making bodies and things like that. So nothing that's absolutely new that we have to do, but again, we'll take a look at the new bill and see what might have changed with this. One thing that just came out last week is the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administration, those directors put out a joint letter outlining their planning emphasis areas for the next year for 2022. And up here on the screen are those 5 or 6 things that they want MPOs as well as the DOT itself to focus on. And a lot of these align with the transportation bill that just came out. So climate change, equity, complete streets, having public involvement processes engage more with the virtual options that we've started to do over the last couple of years, planning and environmental linkages, and then assessing how we collect data, how we share data, just all the aspects of data in transportation planning. So again, we'll be figuring out how to plug these into our work program for the coming year as well. So now we turn to you as members of the MPO and ask, what do you want us to be working on over the next year? So if you have things in mind for plans, studies, if you need technical assistance, those kind of things, now's the time to start letting us know what those are so we can put them in. We will definitely be coming forward too with what we think should be done, to maintain those programs and everything that I just spoke about. But if there are things that you want for your community or you think that would be good for the region, now is a good time to bring those up over the next couple of months. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any of those ideas. Feel free to share them here if you want to as well, if you want to have a discussion on them with the committee. But that's really what we're here today to tell you about is just what the program is, what the work program is, but also solicit your ideas for additional tasks that we should put in there. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you have.
So Dylan, this is Steve. Is it so we would, if we have ideas, we should get them to you sooner than later, but worst case, well before April 1st. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, if we can have them in the draft, that's great. It can always go in after the draft is complete, but it's just easier to get them in sooner. We can also amend the program throughout the year. So if things come up, we can definitely add those things in. It's just a lot easier to allocate resources and everything if we can know what the year is going to look like up front and not have to squeeze it in mid-year.
Great. Okay. All right. Anybody have any additional questions for Dylan? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to item 6. Item 6 is a priority project list for is the priority project list, and that's Zach Young. So
Yes, thank you. Just want to give you an update on the priority project list. We've been working with tech committee members to put this list together. We sent out the list from last year and requested that communities provide updates to it. So the updated list is provided in your agenda packet. You can see the areas that are highlighted in red are areas that we've made changes to. There were a few projects that were dropped off the list completely, but for the most part, it stayed the same with a few additions. Really, all I'm asking at this time is that you review the list and make sure that the projects you have on there have been entered correctly, that all the information is accurate. If you do not have a project on here and you want a project on this list, please reach out to me and we can get that added in. The next step for this list will be taking it to the funding subcommittee at their March meeting for them to review and make a recommendation on, and then we'll bring it back to tech exec and policy in April to approve and move on to the partnership. Again, if you want to make any changes to it, please reach out to me. If not, this is just an informational item, and please ask any questions that you have. I'll try to answer them. Thanks.
thank you, Zach. Any questions for Zach? Okay, hearing none. Thanks, Zach. Next item, report on upcoming events, and that looks like it's Dylan Mullenix today.
Yeah, I'll let Gunnar handle this one actually, since he
Okay.
is on, this is his thing, so.
Okay, thanks, Gunnar.
Good morning, everyone. A handful of things to draw your attention to, and as always, we'll do a follow-up email with links, so if you don't catch everything today, that's just fine. First, coming up on some sustainability trainings coming up in January. A few different sessions for you to look at here. We'll send that link here in a little bit. This is through APA. Next slide. Similarly related to comprehensive planning with regards to planning, also through APA Iowa chapter this time. Coming up on February 2nd, one of our own, Allison Van Pelt, will be on the panel for that one. Next slide. Also want to draw your attention to an annual review of all the WMA activities happening. So that's also coming up on February 7th. And Allison is your point of contact for that one as well. Next slide. And the Iowa Water Conference is coming up in March. That's a little bit ways out, but want to get you that on your calendars. Next slide. And that's it.
Thank you, Gunnar. Any questions for Gunnar? As Gunnar mentioned, he'll send out the links to a number of those events after the meeting. So any questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. Item 8, other non-action items of interest.
Yeah, I've got one, and then I think Zach has a couple here. My one item is, now that we're in the new calendar year, if your community hasn't done it already, and I know the folks on the tech committee aren't necessarily ones directly responsible for this, but if you want to prod your city manager, city clerk, whoever you need to talk to have your communities appoint their representatives for the new calendar year. We've gotten some folks in. We asked to have it in by the end of December, but we haven't received everybody's yet. So if you could do us a favor and check with your community, whoever it is within your community, to make sure that's been done. And then we'll do orientations and so forth once we get a full list of all the new members for the year. So that's what I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Zach, did you have some items as well?
Yeah, thanks. Just wanted to give you guys a quick update on the transload facility. We're really nearing the end of the process. Things are really starting to wrap up. They're expecting to get railroad sign off sometime in February or March. Once the railroad sign off on it, the FRA will consider the project completed and they'll be able to close out the grant. So we have a couple more quarterly reports we have to submit, and then a final performance report is due to the FRA at closeout. But we're really getting close to the end of the transload process. We will have some ongoing reporting that we have to do over the next 3 years. I think it's an annual report for the next 3 years. So there's a little bit of that, but we are getting close to closing out this project. Next slide, Dylan. Just wanted to share a couple of photos with you. This is a picture from March 9th of 2021, just when they really first started breaking ground on the project. And then I've got a picture from December of 2021 that shows what it looks like now. So just a nice kind of before after to see how much progress and work they've completed in not even a full year. So very happy with the way this project has gone. I think I maybe have a couple more slides here, just an update on where we're at with the grant funds. I mentioned we're getting ready to close it out. We spent almost $11 million of the 11.2 million. So we only have $468,000 in federal funds remaining to reimburse for. So we're anticipating that with our next reimbursement request, we'll have closed out all the federal funds on the project. I think maybe there's one more slide. Yeah, again, warehouse is supposed to be operational by the end of February. Project closed out sometime in February or March. And then we will have to wait for the formal certificate of occupancy from the city. That will have to wait until probably May. There's some landscaping that has to be completed before the city will issue that. The FRA is not concerned about the landscaping, so they'll be able to close out the project sooner, but that formal certificate won't come until May. And I think that's all I have on the transload facility. Happy to take any questions if anybody has any. If there are any questions, my only other item is a reminder that the STPG and TAP applications are due by the end of the day tomorrow. As long as they're in by midnight, that's fine. And then we've got a date scheduled for the applicant presentations to the funding subcommittee. That will be on February 24th from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. That time might change a little bit depending on how many applications we get, but that's the time we've blocked off for the presentations. So please mark that down on your calendar if you submitted an application and are planning to present. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Zach? Okay, thank you so much, Zach. That's a great update on the transload facility. That's awesome news. So thank you. All right, that brings us to our item 9. Our next meeting date will be February 3rd. 2022 at 9:30 a.m. February 3rd, 2022 at 9:30 a.m. Item 10, we'll hereby declare this meeting adjourned. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.